live from Books and Books here in Coral Gables. Thanks to the Knight Foundation for their generous support. Just a reminder to our internet audience, if at any time during the presentation this evening you'd like to get a signed copy of the book, you can give us a call here at the store. We'll get a book autograph for you, and for the shipping, it's free of charge to ship it for you here anywhere in the United States. And if you have a question for the author, you can even call the store and translate that question into us, and we'll make sure the author hears it. For those of you that are here, please silence your cell phones, and please make sure you take a look at our Books and Books website. That'll give you all the information about the bookstore and all the events we present here. We average about 60 events a month. We sometimes do 4 a night. We do Spanish events, kids events, poetry readings, first-time authors, celebrity signings. And when you do visit our site, please give us your email so we can keep you apprised of everything that goes on here at the store so you don't miss everything. And I also ask you to visit our newest location at the historic Sears Tower at the Adrian Arch Center downtown. Beautiful new bookstore and bar. Very enjoyable experience. Of course, when you're not here, you can be there. When you're not there, you can be here. And also, I will tell you that we are live streaming tonight. As I mentioned, there's a couple of cameras here in the store pointed at the audience for the Q&A portion to come up later. So for the benefit of those people that may be watching on the internet, just make sure you're sitting next to who you're supposed to be sitting next to. Well, tonight we're very happy to have with us Sergei Boissier and his new book, Damage Control. Here to introduce Serge is his friend, society columnist, and self-proclaimed social media queen. Please give a warm welcome to Daisy Oliveira.
You weren't supposed to say self-proclaimed. That's what I'm told. Well, I'm very honored to be here tonight to introduce my new favorite writer, Sergei. I got to know Sergei's mother, Dolores Smithies, years ago at the many dazzling parties she gave when I was the society columnist for the Miami Herald. Weirdly enough, though, I never met Sergei, even though we have dozens of very close friends in common. I heard about Damage Control last summer from a friend here in Miami. I promptly bought the book, loved memoirs and biographies, then devoured it, then had to contact Sergei to congratulate him, actually more like gushing ridiculously, on his masterful writing. No surprise, after multiple emails, texting, and single-handedly, he has used up just this month about 3 gigs of my 4-gig Verizon data plan. I realize some people, though, have had a tough time with some scenes in the book because they love Dolores as I did. But Dolores had no filter. Sergei is very much his mother's son and did not hold back in the book. I'm sure Dolores helped in making this event happen, even bringing us together with tremendous pride. And no matter what your opinion, this is his truth. So now I'm thrilled to introduce my friend, Sergei Boissier.
Is this working? Does anyone have a Xanax? I'm just kidding. Hello, Facebook. First time on internet. Very happy to be here. And I've been trying to make this happen for 10 months. So better late than never. And I have one person to thank for getting this ball started, and it's Vicky, my long-lost aunt, who was much more stubborn and persistent than I was in getting this event going. And I can't thank her enough. And I also want to thank Daisy, the queen of PR, the queen of Twitter, for taking me under her wing and trying desperately to embrace social media, which I don't do beyond Facebook. But she's been very generous to me, and I mainly want to thank all of you for being here, because this is where a lot of the book takes place. It's where I started the book, it's where I ended the book, and it's where I thought I wouldn't be able to return after publishing the book for a long time. So the fact that you have all embraced this book and me and are here despite whatever misgivings you might have had about some of its contents speaks volumes, and I thank you. It took me 6 to 8 years to write this book, and when all is said and done, to me it's a very simple story about a mother and son, and it's also about journeys, inner and outer. And it's only now that the journey is almost over that I realized that part of taking 6 to 8 years to write the book was to keep my mom alive with me, and to relive the experiences and try to make sense of them, and try to bring closure to all the good times and the bad times as well. I know many of you have questioned some of the tough scenes I chose to include. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about that after. I would just like to cite one quote that I came across yesterday by another fellow memoirist whose name I forgot to write down. You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better. So since this book is about journeys, tonight I'm going to take you on a little journey, along with Mom, who I feel very much is here with us. And we're going to start out in Key Biscayne and move on to New York and end up in Cuba, where it all began. I hope you enjoy the voyage. By the way, my daughter, who's age 9 and very proper, told me before leaving, Dad, whatever you do, don't use the F word. And I said, what do I do if I come across the F word? She said, just say making hot dogs. So if you hear me making hot dogs, you know what that's referring to. And if I go on too long, feel free to help yourself to the bar, to Twitter, to Facebook, to Instagram. Like my friend Daisy, I'm a social media whore. So the first vignette takes place in Switzerland. It's called Black Bean Soup. Some of you may have heard of it. I'm 6 years old at the time, living the life of little Lord Fauntleroy at the Chateau de Vinci in Switzerland. And in all my glory with Mom, enjoying every minute of it, except for my recalcitrant sister who didn't obey as a proper subject. So here we are at Black Bean Soup. Although Nan was an obedient subject, usually doing whatever I told her to do, the one thing I could not control was her health. She was sick all the time, mumps, measles, chicken pox, high fevers. I was told that it was because she had been born premature and had spent the first 2 months of her life in an incubator. Data explained that it was like putting a pot roast back in the oven when it hasn't been cooked enough. The image elicited a certain amount of pity on my part, but after months and years of having her always be the center of attention, with presents and visitors on a regular basis, I began to deeply resent her very existence. What wouldn't I do to be able to miss school for weeks on end and sit in bed all day receiving gifts and holding court? I began to suspect that she was doing it on purpose, faking illness after illness to gain the upper hand and usurp my position. And I figured out that her main strategy involved not eating. 3 times a day, Tata would bring her trays of food, and Nan would always say the same thing: I'm not hungry and this tastes like caca. So one day, while I was in the bathroom, I came up with a plan. I removed a piece of my own caca from the toilet and wrapped it in tissue paper. Then I snuck down to the kitchen, hiding my treasure in my pocket, and when no one was looking, I dumped it into the black bean soup that Tata had just prepared for Nan and placed on her tray. The soup was very hot, and I burned myself as I pushed the piece of shit to the bottom of the bowl so that it wouldn't show. I followed Tata up to Nan's room, experiencing a thrill of excitement and triumph and slight terror. Mitong, she said, using her affectionate nickname for me, why are you following me? Don't bother your sister anymore. She has to eat, and today I've fixed her favorite soup. I don't want you teasing her. Please let me come. I'll be good, I promise, I said, eager to witness the crime that was about to occur. Nan was in bed as usual, playing with all the latest toys she had gotten as a result of whatever else ailed her this time. She loved making me jealous by showing them to me over and over again, flaunting them. But this time I would show her. Nanita, look, I brought your favorite soup, black bean soup. I hate black bean soup, and I'm not hungry, and I won't eat, exclaimed Nan with her usual spoiled brat voice. You love black bean soup. Come on, just one bite for me, please. Tata's practiced look of pleading always succeeded in getting Nan to try at least one bite. She held the spoon out to her, and Nan swallowed it reluctantly. It tastes like caca. Nanita, your mother does not approve of that language. Little senoritas don't talk like that. Now try another one. No. One for your grandmother. She's coming this afternoon to visit you. And what will she think when I tell her you didn't eat your lunch, querida? This had a profound effect on Nan. She loved Mina as much as I did and did not want to risk her displeasure, so she took another bite. Yucky, 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 caca. Stop saying that, cried Tata. Sergei will take a bite too to show you how good it tastes. I hadn't anticipated this. But Tata, if I eat from her spoon, then I'll get her germs and get sick too. Tata reproached herself for not having thought of this. She told Nan that she would take a spoonful herself. She dipped the spoon into the bowl and brought it slowly to her mouth, pretending to savor it and watching Nan's expression to gauge her success. "Kaka!" shrieked Nan triumphantly, spotting the piece on the spoon. Her delight and surprise at having been right all along was quickly replaced by disgust. She began spitting to get rid of whatever was left in her mouth. Tata stared at the spoon in disbelief. "It's not caca," she said as persuasively as possible. "Yes, it is, smell it." To prove that there wasn't any caca in the soup, Tata plunged the spoon back into the bowl with determination, and as she lifted it to her mouth, she saw, much to her horror, the offending morsel mixed in with the black beans. She burst into tears and ran out of the room with the tray. I felt badly. I hadn't intended to hurt Tata, whom I loved more than life itself. I went out to play with my pet rabbits, 2 brothers, a white one and a gray one, that I had talked Arturo, the retarded gardener, into giving me. I loved Arturo. He was always happy, always laughing, and he spent hours caring for his beloved rabbits. Tata came out to find me. She was still crying, but she was angrier than I had ever seen her. Poisoning the food that she prepared with so much love and pride with feces was as close to sacrilege as you could get in her book. "How could you do such a thing?" she yelled. "You know, what did I do?" I protested. "You know perfectly well what you did, and wait until your mother gets home." At the mention of Dalsy, I was overcome with terror. "You won't tell her," I said, pleading. "I most certainly will, just you wait." "Please, Daddy, please don't tell her," I said, sobbing. "She will whip me, I know she will, and you deserve it." I hugged her and began kissing her all over, crying my heart out. This usually worked with Tata whenever I was in trouble. "Please, I'll do anything in the world." "Anything?" she said, her face lighting up. "Then give me one of your conejos." For months she had been trying to convince me to give her one of my rabbits to cook. It was a delicacy in her native region, Galicia, and she hadn't had the opportunity to cook one since Cuba. She could not grasp the idea of having rabbits as pets. "Not my rabbits, please, Tati, please, te quiero." "Well, in that case, I'll have to tell your mother," she said with finality. I was horrified at the choice that faced me. It was either give up one of my rabbits or risk being whipped to death by Dalsy. I looked ruefully at the rabbits for a long time. "You can have that one," I finally said, my voice barely audible, pointing at the gray one with the long ears. Tata seized the long-awaited opportunity. She opened the cage and grabbed the rabbit by the ears. She then carried him to the other courtyard, where to my utter horror, she grabbed him by the hind legs and smashed his head against the wall several times. She then laid the rabbit on the ground. I could see that it was still breathing and its eyes were wide open. Kill it, I screamed at Tata. "I hate you, I hope you die." At that moment, Dalsy's car pulled into the driveway. She parked and jumped out, her miniature greyhounds in tow. "What is going on here?" she asked, seeing me upset. "Nothing," I said. Tata and I were both standing in front of the rabbit, trying to conceal it. "What are you two up to? What are you hiding?" "Nada, señora," she answered, looking even more guilty than I did. "What on earth is going on?" Dalsy demanded, her voice rising, at which point the dogs ran over to the rabbit and she followed. "Maria, if you don't tell me immediately what is going on, you will be on the next flight back to Spain," she said when she saw the almost dead creature. Tata was as terrified of La Señora as I was and everyone else, so she told Dalsy the whole story, about the caca in the soup and the rabbit I had given her in exchange for not telling Dalsy what I had done. When Dalsy got mad, you could see it coming like a volcano about to erupt. Her face would grow red, her nostrils would begin to flare, and she would start shaking. She slapped me in the face 3 times in rapid succession. She then grabbed my arm and dragged me back into the house, her long pink nails digging into the flesh, twisting like a corkscrew, her signature pinch. She held me like this all the way up to the grand staircase to her bedroom on the 2nd floor, shrieking, "Just wait until your father gets home." She then went to her large closet and selected one of her belts and told me to pull down my pants and lean over the bed. She proceeded to whip me 20 times, using the buckle end, murmuring between lashes like a mantra, "This hurts me this more than it hurts you." After it was over, I was sent to my room and she went to deal with Tata. "Maria!" she shrieked as she headed to the servants' quarters. I cried and cried until I fell asleep. I dreamt of giant rabbit monsters clawing their way out of the cage and coming after me with their huge fangs and crazed expressions, a recurring nightmare that would haunt me for years. I was awakened by the voices of Dad and Dalsy outside my door, arguing. "Of course, I had to be the one to discipline him, as usual," she said. "You are too weak, you just can't handle it. Now talk to him, JJ. For God's sake, be firm. Dad came in the room and with all the passion he could muster, told me that had he been there when it happened, he would have made sure that I ate every last bite. Then he left the room. Tata came in later, bringing me dinner on a tray. I cried in her arms and told her how sorry I was and how much I loved her. I couldn't believe that she had killed my rabbit. I felt so betrayed and disillusioned. I had always turned to Tata for solace and comfort when Dalsy went into one of her rages. How could she have done that to her mitong? She smiled through her tears and held me tight against her abundant chest. By morning she was gone, sent away once again to work elsewhere, only to return a few months later when Dalsy realized that she couldn't manage without her. The next day I was taken to see a shrink, the first of many throughout my life. That was how Dalsy rolled. First punishment, then seek professional help. After chatting with me and testing me, the psychiatrist reported back to my parents. Years later, I would come across the report. I was a normal child with an exceptionally high IQ and also highly sensitive. But as far as Dalsy was concerned, and by extension Dad, the incident had confirmed that something was wrong with me. From that day on, I was the hot-dogged up middle child, needing more attention than the needing more attention than the other kids and acting out to get it. The problem child. That's part one. Thank you. Thank you, sweetie. I need it. Thank you, baby. This is my oldest friend, who's very happy I didn't put stories about her in the book.
Thank God.
Okay. That wasn't too long? Okay. Okay, flash forward about, I'm about 18. And I'm on my way to Georgetown, and the rest of the family is doing their thing. 1983 was a year of transition for all of us. Nan went off to the Madeira School in Virginia. Anton moved to California after a rocky few years in Manhattan. And Dad retired from the bank and moved to Buffalo with his wife to take over the family business, thus closing another chapter of our Swiss life. And Dalsy, after putting us through 7 years of hell, finally left Jacques in their vast gloomy duplex on Park Avenue to move back into 19 East, the same building we had lived in before moving to Switzerland. As with Stad, she was trying to turn back the clock to erase the nightmare chapter of her life as if it had never happened, to get back to a time before her grand plan had become unraveled. Sorry, chicken foot. That was also the year I turned 18. As soon as I arrived at Georgetown, two things happened almost simultaneously. I came out, and the AIDS made its coming out as well. My first Saturday night on campus, I snuck away from the dormitory meet and greet to go cruising. Excited and thrilled and terrified at the prospect of finally being able to fulfill my desires and live my sexuality openly. I ventured into several bars that I had studiously looked up in gay guides and ended up meeting a cute young black guy and getting it on with him in his car, as oblivious to the passers-by as I was to this mysterious, scary disease which had begun to devastate gay meccas like San Francisco and New York. During my first weekend home, I decided to break the news to Dalsy over dinner at Mortimer's, the Uber Wasp hangout on the Upper East Side. You went there to be seen. Eating was beside the point. I figured that it was a good choice since the place would be filled with her crowd. She wouldn't allow herself to make a scene. Unless she got drunk, of course, which was always a distinct possibility. Once she hit that first margarita, there was no stopping her. Nan was there too, and I knew that she had already started dabbling with girls at Madeira, an all-girls school in Virginia famous for its headmistress, Jean Harris, who had killed her lover, the Scarsdale doctor. As I revealed my big secret, taking perverse pleasure in the reaction it provoked in her, Dalsy attempted to maintain a brave and neutral face throughout dinner, saying all the right things and pledging her love and support. A few hours, however, she stumbled into my room, completely smashed, and with great seriousness and deliberation said to me, "I just don't understand the big fuss, Sergei. After all, a hole is a hole." The very next day, she took me to see Pierre, her beloved French hairdresser who was dying in the hospital. We put on gloves and masks to enter his room, and there he lay, weighing maybe 50 pounds. I stared at him aghast, hoping the mask hid my expression. The exuberant happy homo with his outrageous leather outfits and scandalous tales, whom I would observe with thrilled forbidden fascination when he came to the house to do Dalsey's hair, had turned into an unrecognizable bony creature, a veritable cadaver with a look of terror in his eyes, and the smell of death emanating from his every pore. On the way out, Dalsey stopped me in the hallway, turned to me, looked deep into my eyes, and said, "That's exactly what's going to happen to you if you don't be careful." Shortly after, I came out to my godfather, Maito, who a decade earlier had walked out on his wife and 2 sons after belatedly and brazenly declaring his preference for men. He lived in Litchfield, Connecticut with his lover who made wigs, and the Jack Russells they bred and raised. While at Taft, I had spent many weekends at his place, lying awake at night, hoping that one of his guests might jump me. As with the teachers at Taft and the priests at Georgetown, these fantasies were never fulfilled. So there are decent people in the church. Right? Right? When I told Maito about coming out to Dalsey, he said, "Well, my dear, I hope she didn't act surprised. After all, she was the one who used to dress you as a girl during your first years and tell everyone, 'This is my gay son, the one who will never leave me for another woman.'" She would deny the story until her dying day. Later that fall, Claudia, whom I had been close to for 10 years, died at the age of 18, 2 months after surviving a car crash in Italy when the old Jeep she and her friends had been riding in lost its brakes and plunged into a ravine where it caught fire. The others had been bounced out of the Jeep unscathed, but Claudia, the only one wearing a seatbelt, had remained stuck inside. By the time her friends were able to get her out, she had suffered third-degree burns over 90% of her body. After she was transferred back to Miami, I went to visit her as she lay dying. I stood hopeless before her agony, stroking her beautiful angelic hair and face, the only parts of her body to have been spared the flames. She died a few weeks later, the blood oozing from her skin. I had lost my first friend, and with her the dreams and visions we had conjured for our improbable, wistful future together. Death seemed to be all around me. For the next several years, I wondered if every man I slept with would give me AIDS and kill me, especially the black man I met and went home with during one of my first outings to the gay bars in Washington. After we had finished making hot dogs, he told me that he was Haitian. It was like delivering a death sentence. Back then, everyone knew that AIDS came from Haiti. So for several weeks, I was convinced that I was going to die. In time, the danger became part of the thrill, not because I sought it, but because it was real. For the next 4 years, I would spend my weekends frequenting the gay bars and clubs of the nation's capital, looking for Mr. Right, drinking enough to convince myself that I'd found him before we even left the club together, falling in love by the next morning, and moving on to the next conquest the following weekend. It felt wonderful to be desired, and the sex, I told myself, was just a gateway to something else. Being picked up by a hot guy, often older, made me feel special. It made me feel loved. It made up for all the validation that I hadn't gotten from all the males in my life. I suppose that this troika of sex, love, and death was no different for me than for every other gay man of my generation. We stepped out of the closet into this liberating, terrifying world where every time you met a guy, you wondered if you would have sex with him, fall in love, and or die. For a while, we managed to convince ourselves that AIDS was something that happened to others, to all those scary old men who had been around in the 70s, the clones with their tacky mustaches and tight jeans and the color-coded handkerchiefs in their back pockets that denoted their bizarre sexual preferences, the ones who went to bathhouses and had sex with dozens of men in one night, thousands in a year. We were not like them. We were just normal kids doing what our straight counterparts were doing, getting laid on weekends. But then inevitably, one of the boys I knew, Steve Champion, I will never forget his name, a gorgeous Cuban guy a few years ahead of me at Georgetown, got sick and died within a matter of weeks. We were all deeply shocked. Rumor had it that he had been making hot dogs all summer with hundreds of men while spending a semester abroad in Paris, so it could happen to us after all. I spent the following summer myself in Paris, living on a barge on the Seine and attending a course in French cinema. When I wasn't in class, I would cruise the Jardin des Tuileries and venture into the clubs. And I met many men that summer and wondered if I too would end up like Steve Champion. I graduated from Georgetown with a 3.9 grade average from my senior year, almost a perfect score. This was nothing short of a miracle, given that until Georgetown I had always been in the C plus B minus range. To celebrate, the entire family had flown in. Greasy, all my siblings, Dad and his wife, along with my stepfather Jacques, and Dalsey's current beau, Jack Warnicki. All of Dalsey's men, the three Jacks, as we called them. She had also invited a Cuban couple whom she knew socially. There was no reason for them to be at the dinner, except for the fact that the husband was the highest Cuban appointee in the Reagan administration, which Dalsey thought would add social luster to the event. The dinner took place in an elegant French restaurant in downtown D.C., whose name I have long since blocked. Dalsey proceeded to get rip-roaring drunk and spent most of the meal taunting my helpless stepmother, referring her to her repeatedly as Nanook of the North, leaving everyone at the table aghast. It was the longest meal of my life. Finally, it came to a blessed end, and as we waited outside for the Cuban's limousine to pull up, Dalsey started to pee right there on the sidewalk as she puffed nonchalantly on her cigarette. I was the first one to notice the puddle, followed quickly, puddle spreading beneath her feet, soon followed by the emissary's wife. She stared completely horrified as it slowly dawned on her that what was happening, this elegant woman whom she barely knew was peeing on the sidewalk right in front of the restaurant and would soon be getting into their plush government-appointed limousine for the ride home. I had long ago nicknamed Dalsey the lady who pees where she pleases. She had a habit of relieving herself wherever she felt like it, totally oblivious to whoever was around her. We had witnessed her peeing courtside while watching a tennis game at the Wellington Polo Club in Palm Beach, off boats, on beaches, and her specialty on towel-covered beach chairs. We had learned at a young age never to sit in Dalsey's chair because you were certain to land in urine-soaked towel. So I was used to her peeing. But watching that Cuban lady as she stared at Dalsey, relieving herself on the sidewalk in all her finery, definitely took it to a whole other level. For months, I seethed with anger and shame. Why had she done this to me? She claimed that ever since her difficult pregnancy, she had developed a bladder control program. But I have always suspected that she did it for the same reason that she did other things in front of her children. Her narcissism had reached such a plateau that she took a perverse thrill in showing how oblivious she was to the rules by which others lived, and how willfully unconcerned by whatever effects her reckless actions might have on us, her children. Following graduation, I interned for a family AIDS clinic at Albert Einstein in the Bronx. These children were at the forefront of the AIDS epidemic, and many of them didn't know what they had. Every day I would take the subway from the Upper East Side to the Morris Parkway in the Bronx and observe and interact with these families in crises. For 2 months, I played with dying children and talked to their desperate mothers who were often dying themselves. Those 2 months undoubtedly changed my life. Meanwhile, Dalsey had also immersed herself in the world of pediatric AIDS, doing fundraisers and volunteering at Metropolitan Hospital in Harlem. It was as if we had both decided independently that if we contributed enough to the cause, I might be spared. We were joined in our magical thinking, too terrified to raise the subject with each other, but deeply committed to doing what we could to help. Can I do one more? Is that it? Yeah? Thank you. Thank you very much. Phew. Okay. That was the tough one. Lots of making hot dogs. This takes place after the day after her funeral here in Miami, toward the end of the book. I'm about 40. The next day, I head to the airport for the long flight to Geneva, the last leg of a voyage that had begun 10 months ago. At the time, I had thought that I was leaving for a few days, but now it feels like I've been gone a lifetime. I find myself alone with Dalsey again for one more trip together, the last of so many throughout our lives, happy and sad, adventurous and perilous. After takeoff, I place the box containing the urn with her ashes on the seat next to me by the window, and I pick up the black book. As I open it, the letter falls out, surprising me. I had forgotten about it. Sipping a Bloody Mary and wishing I had a cigarette, I begin to read. I'm going to skip the letter because I can't get through that here. As the flight attendants go about their routine, setting up trays and serving drinks to the pampered passengers in business class, I lose all sense of time and place. The tears come again like a tsunami, overflowing, spilling onto the pages, seemingly without end. People are undoubtedly staring at me. After all, this is Swiss Air. They're not accustomed to such overt displays of emotion. But if they are, I'm unaware. I put the letter away and wait for the tears to stop so I can move on to the journals. With Dalsey by my side, I revisit her life in Cuba and beyond. I read about her days at the sugar mill, astride her beloved black horse Noy, who would later be killed by Castro's guerrillas, riding through the fields of green cane rippling in the breeze, with her grandfather Fico by her side in his white guayabera and Panama hat, her heart beating with joyous anticipation as they approached America, the mill that his father had built for him, thrilled by the pound and grind of the machines as they mashed up the cane, the erotic smell of the raw, unrefined sugar. During these walks, Fico would survey his lands and tell her with quiet pride about the early days. And now he had turned forest into productive land, building an empire whose sugar would be sold throughout the Americas. How she had loved this place called Cuba, this land of myths, where everything seemed possible and which had suddenly vanished. I read about her early flirtations, her teasing and cajoling and first attempts at seduction, her longing and desire, her budding narcissism, the cruel games she played in the name of love. I read about her summers in Europe with Fico and Nanny, those glorious summers she had often told us about, which always began with a long stay at the Crillon in Paris, where she would spend her days studying languages and visiting museums with her Russian governess, making the rounds of friends and couturiers with her grandmother, or going to the jeweler's on the Place Vendôme with Fico to help him pick something out for Nanny and for his lady friend, and if Dalsey had been especially good, for herself as well. After Paris, they would take off in the motor car, along with her chauffeur and maid, for destinations like Biarritz and Venice and Salzburg. She was the only child invited on these trips, grandchild. By putting on her pedestal, Fico had instilled in Dalsey at a young age the conviction that a special destiny lay in store for her, and this had led to a lifetime of searching and frustration and disillusion. At 15, her parents, fearing that she was becoming too spoiled, too entitled, sent her back to the States to attend Dobbs, a boarding school outside of New York. She had hated every minute of it. She had no friends, detested sports, and was at a loss when it came to the chores that were required, which she would pay her roommate half her allowance to carry out for her. Each summer, she would return to Cuba, to Havana, and the sugar mill and the ranch, and her beloved Fico. By then, he had become an important man in Cuba, an influential senator with aspirations to the presidency. She basked in his glory, following him wherever he went, whether to inspect his properties or to his office in the majestic Senate building, or even to deliver gifts to the mysterious lady who was his mistress. I read about that last crazy summer before her engagement, when Dad had chased her around Paris and across Europe, courting her assiduously, outfoxing the three other suitors who were also in hot pursuit that summer. Carlos Verdeja, the brazen Cuban playboy who had been tracking her for years, and the princes de la Tour d'Auvergne, two brothers who would show up in every European city and resort that Dalsey and her grandmother stopped at, charming at her with their gallant French ways, attempting to outdo each other with grand schemes of seduction, determined to take home the big Cuban prize. I read about her attending the famous Bal de Brisac and leaving with one of the princes, only to have Dad appear at her hotel at 8 in the morning with a bandaged ankle which he had twisted while jumping over a fence in an attempt to follow them. The image makes me smile. I hardly recognize the man who would become my father. After Paris, she and Nanny had sought refuge at La Bourboule, a spa in Auvergne, where the princes had appeared along with Dad. And then had come Venice, where they had been joined by Carlos, who would follow Dalsey by gondola wherever she went, even showing up at the Danieli one night at 4 in the morning, wasted and insistent, causing much excitement with Nanny and the local hotel staff. Following that heady summer, the best of her life, according to Dalsey, Dad had proposed, and they had married the following year in Cuba, only to leave 18 months later. Even though I am reading her journals for the first time, it is as if I know the passages by heart. These are the stories she has recited to us over and over, embellishments added each time. And then I get to the Red Book, All I Know About Parties, begun right around the time of my birth and covering the early years of her marriage and her years in New York. On the inside cover, she has inscribed 2 quotes. Il est plus facile de rêver sa vie que de la construire. It is easier to dream one's life than to build it. And I believe in being faithful to a man for at least 6 years. I'm taken aback. The two quotes contain the entirety of her life like bookends. The first mention of me takes my breath away. Sergei was born 2 months ago. He is fat and white, with blue eyes and a most peculiar hunger, which is constant. Finally, after going through miscarriage after miscarriage and another operation, he was conceived during our second moon honeymoon in Greece, where I spent my days praying to the gods and making delicious love with my suizo. I pray we can make him a man equipped to face life and love it. I pray he will be proud enough to build and not destroy. I pray he will always have a twinkle in his eye and a lightness in his step. She got that one right. Got the lightness. I stare at those words transfixed for a long time. Almost done. I read about how deeply in love with Dad she had been at first, placing him on a pedestal, a little in awe of him and fearful of the intensity and seriousness of his love for her. I read about their hectic and stormy 3-month honeymoon through Europe and their subsequent move to Mina's country house in Grèce-sur-Loing, a small fortress consisting of 3 little houses connected by bridges, ivied and antique well, with a large stone crucifix in the middle of the garden. She had burst into tears the first time she had seen it and had cried for a week. She had tried to adjust to village life, ordering elaborate menus to be prepared by Anna, the chef who had trained at the Cordon Bleu, and setting out every morning with her straw hat and gardening gloves and basket to cut roses and arrange them into bouquets. To occupy herself in the afternoons, she went to Fontainebleau and painted nudes and walked her miniature pincer Boissier in the Bois. And while J.J. wrote his novel, she played the same make-believe game she had played as a child. And then winter came, and with it, the end of her rose-cutting in art classes. She started to feel the walls closing in on her. She began to cough and cry and fight with Dad all the time. After the incident in the fountain, when she had been found singing at 2 a.m. with a bottle of champagne in the village square, they left and returned to Cuba, where their marriage blossomed. I read about her early years in New York, the thrill of living in such a fabulous, exciting city with such a beautiful man and wonderful husband, knowing freedom for the first time. In meticulous detail, she recounts glamorous nights spent at El Morocco and other fashionable clubs. Her entries are full of superlatives. She is on top of the world. I revisit her trips to Greek and Morocco and Turkey. Exotic adventures to distant lands taken with their friends, other young, glamorous couples living the golden life. Untouchable, almost divine, at the apex of their youth and beauty. And then slowly the tone changes. She reveals doubts about her marriage, her ability to make Dad happy, the growing dissatisfaction she begins to feel, the wanderlust. She writes about summers spent on Long Island in a provincial boring place called Lawrence, where they rented an ugly, rambling house with the jets taking off from nearby Kennedy Airport, making conversation impossible. Bored, she spends her days on the beach watching her babies and listening to the other wives and mothers discuss children and babysitters. She tries to bridge the great divide between the perfect husband and the fabulous apartment and the marvelous life that everyone is always reminding her how fortunate she is to have, and her growing discontent and restlessness. Her dissatisfactions, her feelings of emptiness, and the frantic search for something she cannot identify. The fear that time is passing too quickly and that she will never find what she is looking for. She feels guilty for having these feelings and struggles to conquer them and appreciate what she has, or at least settle for it. More and more she finds herself going through the motions, rarely feeling anything. And then she meets Jacques. The rest of the journal, spanning 5 years, is full of anguish, sadness, despair, uncertainty, confusion. She is torn between staying with Dad, the husband that her family had picked out for her, handsome, kind, generous, dutiful, distant, and the little Jewish man, as her mother-in-law called him. His culture and brilliance, his passion, his self-made fortune and ambition remind her of her grandfather Fico, both powerful men who had set out to conquer the world on their own and had succeeded. The kind of man she imagined she would have been had she not been born a woman. Back and forth she goes, one moment deciding that she is leaving Dad to marry Jacques, the next resolving to never see Jacques again for the sake of the children. Along the way, she becomes more and more despondent. feeling increasingly alone, losing herself in depression, helpless against the violent and unceasing seesaw of her competing desires, whether to destroy everything she has and begin anew with this man, knowing she will lose much in the process, or whether to stay and endure. To learn to be grateful for what she has instead of wanting something that she can't have. She contemplates continuing with both of them, since they are both willing to share her, rather than give her up, but in the end, feeling torn and tortured, she cannot accept this arrangement, for she must belong to one man. She must choose. Either way, she knows she is giving up a lot, too much. And then I come across a passage about her father, the man she had so rarely mentioned, whose absence had loomed large. I'll skip that part too. And then the journals end with a recounting of her latest operation, this time to remove a cyst, and with these words, familiar in their unresolvedness. Life once again ebbs out of me. Enough self-pity, enough complaints. God has given me so much, magnificent children, the world's riches, a devoted husband who is also a great human being. How dare one crave more, and yet one dares. How pretentious and ungrateful. Onward with a smile, yesterday is gone. Sleep, eat, go out, dance, laugh, don't stare into space. Doctor, the anesthetic, please, at once, not too much, only enough not to feel. The house looks great, feed the bird, put snapshots in an album, read the Times. How about some iced tea? Think about the trip, Morocco, the bazaars. And the last line, 2 directions, 2 men. Préparez vos ceintures pour l'atterrissage, the flight attendant announces. I look out the window startled. In the distance, I see the snow-covered Alps, so familiar, ever present, immutable, like the cows that gaze along its pastures after the snow has melted. As we approach the airport, we fly over Lake Geneva, shimmering in the morning sunlight. I bask in this glorious landscape of my childhood where we were happy once upon a time. I turn to the urn beside me, and gently caressing the box, I murmur, "Mummy, we're home." Thank you. Thank you. Oh, good, I see at least one crying. Thank you. Any questions?
I think you've left us speechless.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
That's what I was hoping for. Not too long?
No?
I do have a question. You know, your book is extraordinary, and I said this to you the other day. It's just when you read it, it's like, oh, you don't say that. But you're externalizing something that's so much greater than your own subjective experience here. I think you touch people on a lot of levels, and I think if they could look outside, you know, some of this crap and get into the strength of your honesty and the generational thing that goes on. But the isolation with your family that has occurred because of this great piece of art that you've struggled so many years to achieve. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. You know,
Yeah.
I don't. How do you cope with that? How do you cope with that with Nina? I mean, is it worth it having achieved this?
Oh, it's definitely worth it, because if I hadn't done it, they would have found another reason not to approve of my life, you know? And it was the best, as I said earlier, I only realized recently as I was preparing for this event that the reason I took 6 to 8 years to write this book was I was keeping her alive. And so it's the best thing I've ever done, and it doesn't bother me at all, their reaction or lack of reaction, or that's their trip. And in French, we say, c'est la vérité qui blesse. It's the truth, it hurts.
It's also, Sergei, I'm going to ask again, it's also the gay lens. Yeah, I mean, you know, this is, you looked at family structure from the end of the 20th century,
Right.
from the gay lens. And I
Right.
mean, only to have lived it in Latin families like this, do you have this privilege, if you will.
Yeah.
And you externalized a lot.
Yeah.
And I wonder if a lot of that has to do with really externalized homophobia in the family system and in the culture you grew up with.
I think it's part of it, but I also think, at least on the WASP side of the family, you know, there's a very strong belief that you appear in the newspaper 3 times in your life: when you're born, when you get married, and when you die. And it was just airing the dirty laundry that really upset a lot of people. And so that's, No, no, apart from a very vicious letter from an aunt in Buffalo who told me I should spend the rest of my life praying to God for ruining this family and shaming them, and how pathetic my daughter would find me when she grew up to write this book, let the haters hate. There's no response to that kind of thing. I wish one of them had written an intelligent critique of what they didn't appreciate, but it doesn't bother me. And I hope one of them are watching. Hi. Don't hate. No shame in my game. Hillary.
Sergei, I'm just curious. First, it was terrific reading.
Thank you
so
very
much.
much.
Can you talk a little bit about how you started the project in the first place, when you made the decision, and what the process was like as a writer? Because this is a lot to process, and it's a lot to write as beautifully and eloquently as you have.
Thank you very much. I had written 3 unpublished novels before, so I figured let's try something else. And after my daughter was born, we moved down to Miami in November, and I found myself with a lot of time and mom's journals and this little baby. And I thought, what if I forgot about trying to get published and just wrote my story for my daughter? And that was my audience, not my family, not all of you, not gays. I wanted to write a book that in case something happened to me, she would have explaining my life. And that was my filter. If I left a lot out of this book, it was for her. And I hope and I believe that all the stuff that is in the book, I've raised her in a way that she will totally understand and embrace that when she comes to that age. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, you finished your question, sorry. So from there I had the journals. I went through 6 drafts. The first draft was about 80% her journals. Yes. And I was inscribing the chorus. And the lady said, I don't think you're ready to hear this yet because your mom only recently died, but you're a much better writer than she is and much more interesting. So drop the journals and write your own story. And that's how it happened. Thank you. Thank you.
Sergei, I'm wondering, what's up for you next? What's your next?
Well, thank you for the question, because this is my first time live on internet, and my guru Wayne Dyer always says you have to manifest your destiny. So my dream beyond continuing to write is to have my own radio show one day. Kind of a nighttime Dr. Love type of thing. So I'm putting it out there, anyone if you like my voice. I'm sorry, just a little buddy from Georgetown. My God, thank you for being here. And also in terms of my writing, everyone's like, when's the sequel coming? But as far as I'm concerned, enough about me, enough about my mother. I've invaded my daughter's privacy enough. I do so daily on Facebook. So my challenge as a writer, the next step is to write a novel or something completely unrelated to me.
This is from the writer's perspective, my own. This is just made for a film. Anything happening in that realm.
Yeah.
I was contacted by an old Cuban friend whose father some of you may remember. Her name's Polly Aguilera. I don't remember her father. And she had me fly out to me with a producer in Hollywood and to try to write a treatment. They wanted to turn it into a miniseries. And so I drove down to Malibu for the meeting. And basically for an hour they told me what they wanted me to turn this into. More. Like this wasn't enough. They wanted more scandal, more dirt, more this. And at the end of the meeting, I just had it up to here, and I said, you know what? I've put in the hard work. I'm totally up for whatever you guys want to do with it. You write the treatment, and you get this done. So I don't know if it's going anywhere.
Where do you want to go?
Huh?
Where do you want to go now?
Where do I want to go? Where? To dinner? No.
With your story.
With the project? What do you mean?
Yeah, with your story.
The movie project or just the book?
Your next step.
This to me, this is really wonderful because, like I said, it took me 10 months to put this together, and getting published as a middle-aged unknown author is, oh my God, that should be my next book, my God. Apart from books and books, it's all about Amazon. They're the ones who kept me going, and I'm so grateful for tonight. So to me, I thought this was closure. I thought this was the end of the journey after a long 10-month publication. But who knows? Maybe it's only the relaunch and the beginning, and who knows where it'll go. I'm up for anything. That mean you want me to move back?
Yes. I vote for yes.
Sergei, move back in with Granny.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
I call her General Franco. I really don't know. Like I said, I'm trying. All I keep hearing is keep telling your funny stories and all that, but I want a complete break with that. I really want to write a novel. I want to, a lot of this book I think was ignored by a lot of the mainstream media because there was too much about the money and the privilege and all of that, and I think it turned off some people. And quite honestly, when I was writing the book, that didn't even occur to me that this was a 1% book and all this stuff. It was not the purpose of this book, and that's what it was hyped into. And I think it cost me a little bit in terms of, being taken as a serious writer, especially a new one. So, I'm not sure what's coming next, but something completely different. Yeah.
Well, you're honoring your mother in such a magnificent way. So I'm almost answering my question. But other than the way you're honoring her and her legacy, what do you think she would have wanted to do differently?
I think I said, what do you think she would have thought of this? I think she said it to me in the letter at the end. I think she wished she'd expressed her love more. I think she wishes she'd accepted love more. I think she wishes she'd stayed with my father and weathered out the storms. And I don't know, she just learned so much that year. For any of you who've had parents who went through a long decline and dying process, I saw so much, it sounds like a cliche, but so much illumination come into her life last year. She wasn't drinking anymore, so we had this terrific rapport and banter, and we just had a great time. And I saw her become the mother I'd, always missed having. So what would she want to do differently? Maybe not give me the journals. She gave me these journals, so it was a way of her handing me this and saying, do what you need to do. Anything else?
I would like to just say your genuineness and your heartfelt expression of your mom, what a gift it is to honor her that way, and all the colors that she lived.
Thank you very much.
I mean,
I appreciate
it's just
it.
a nice homage to her.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think your book is just getting started.
Thank you very much. Always been a late bloomer. As for what she would have thought of the book, one of her best friends said it to me best. She said, well, first she would have slapped you about a dozen times. And then she would have carried the purse around with her, in her purse, wherever she went, saying, look what my son did. Este mi hijo, bestseller of the year, Pulitzer Prize.
Yes. Plan the party.
We believe she's here.
Bash. And then done the big bash.
I'm just curious as to why you didn't read the letter.
It's very emotional. I don't think I could get through it, and there's only so much I could read tonight, and you got to save some juicy parts for the yeah, buy the book.
Go buy the book.
Well, having known your mom, I got to tell you that, and I've told you this, but I wanted to share it, that the way you portrayed her was almost like a photograph. I mean, it was, I can't, of course, I was never witness to any of the personal moments and such, and that's your truth, but she was perfectly, the portrayed. She was it was like a photograph. It was uncanny, I thought.
Thank you.
That's definitely a talent.
That was the most fun part, getting the voice down at the very beginning. And it's just her, yeah, there wasn't. Thank you. Okay.
Keep a journal her whole life, or was that a memoir that she wrote that we...
No, she wrote 2 journals, and the last one ended in the middle of all this turmoil, and she never wrote again, and kept them in a drawer for 20 years. And, yeah. Or she wrote again and we didn't find it.
One more question that I asked you. Why did you get rid of the journals?
Get rid of them?
I think you got rid of
Oh,
some.
no, I haven't.
Okay, you have them all?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. I thought I'd need this proof in case the family sued me. I have them in a very safe spot. I also tried to get her mailing list. She used to walk around with these giant industrial phone books with 5,000 names, and I begged Gladys to dig those up for me, but I think, for the marketing campaign, but I think my siblings make sure those never appear. That it? Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergei. Thank you all for being here. If you're watching online, you still have time to call the store and get a signed book. If I could just ask you as you rise, if you could fold your chairs, it'll create some room in here. You can visit with Sergei. The books are for sale behind the counter. He'll sign them right here. There's wine, there's music. Stick around. Thanks for being here.